Hello, everyone, and welcome to part two of AWAN's online poetry festival, Poets in Lockdown. My name is Yomna Casey, and I will be hosting today's event. We have three brilliant poets from across the globe performing today, from Beirut to Damascus and London. But first, a huge thank you to Arts Canteen and Arab Women Artists Now Festival for making this event possible and for supporting and highlighting the voices of Arab women through art and creativity. This is the second event of our Poets in Lockdown series as part of AWAN Xtra, where we host talented poets from across the globe to share their work during these difficult times. The theme of today's poems will be war and peace. Our poets will be addressing this theme through their own unique lenses, from memories of warfare to inner battles of war and peace. I am certain you're going to enjoy reveling in their words today. Today's event is part of AWAN Xtra, our way of keeping in touch with you, our community, online. Over the coming months, we'll be featuring Arab women artists from across the UK and beyond as we bridge the social distance with arts, performances, and other special events. So please make sure you keep an eye out on our social media for upcoming events. As for today, make sure you're on our Facebook page, where you can comment and ask questions on our live stream as our poets perform. I'll be keeping an eye out for those questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtags AWAN Festival and be part of AWAN Festival when you do so. So let's get started. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first poet in London, Tasneem Ziada. Tasneem is a nationwide featured spoken word artist. Her performances have included the Lyric Hammersmith Evolution Festival in 2020, Waltham Forest Mela 2019, the Migration Diaspora Literature Festival 2019, the AWAN Festival in 2018, and the Poetry Cafe for Refugee Awareness Week in London in 2017. Her work discusses mental health, displacement, relationships, faith, identity, and womanhood. Tasneem is a freelance creative, facilitating writing workshops and a mindfulness coach for Azra Run Club. She's done voiceover work for the multi-award-winning podcast, Have You Heard of George's Podcast? And has featured alongside Azra's Run Club in Nike's Until We All Win global campaign. So without further ado, over to you, Tasneem.
Thank you for that introduction, Yom. I'm going to start off with a poem I start all my sets with called Swing. Swing. How many times are we going to be here? Again, with this battle with your mind. Is it your favorite fight? Not televised punches, just a spiral that you have memorized, hitting you and you hitting it. And each time you swing, you miss. Out on sustaining passion, because of your addiction to furious short fuse ignition, fragilely contained within depression, you swing again and again, forever missing the masculinity in your feminine occupation. Stand again. Weren't you always the champ? Carrying babies for miles on your back when homes were war zones. Crazy how we're here again, when it's not bombs or bullets making my feet jump to the swing beat, but the dance to survive against mental defeat. So that was my first poem. And I'm going to go into an untitled piece. It goes like this. And we go up and down trying to leave that negative energy behind, but sometimes it's hard to sever your ties when you've created a loyalty to strife. Some say that happiness can be first choice. I can smile with my entire heart shining through my eyes, but I know you'll see the bloodshot lines, nights when I couldn't put my mind to rest. Some days it feels like I'll only be at peace when they lay me down in my final bed. I have too much to live for, and many burdens attached to me every time I try to leave, abandon things that bring me sadness. They grip my heart like family. This pity in my chest is cancerous. I'm choosing to have strength because if I don't, I'll only have suffering to gain. And that's not a path I religiously follow. I know that imams, white men, and older brothers cannot save me. I do not want them to save me. I do not want them to pray for me. I want them to do right by me. It has taken some time for this little girl to heal and feel grown when Lord knows all these big boys only wanted to listen to my voice if they heard me moan out in insecurity. I'm trying to forge intentions from purity, but my submission to other people's hidden motives keep getting the best of me. I hate falling for the same thing, scraping my knees on everyone's repressed sorrows, including my own, stealing my hope for better tomorrows because I keep relying on everyone else to be my superhero. I want to run so far away, where the only thing that can catch me are sun rays, frightened that if I put my fists up, the things I've been fighting won't stop. But they've been guarding me all this time, so I don't know why I second guess my ability to survive. And who told you weren't strong or capable or enough? You have fire in your spirit. It's time to get tough. It's time to get rid of the voices that made you too shy to put on your boxing gloves. So that was my second untitled piece. And I'm going to go straight into the second to last one, if I have enough time. It's called The Beginning. I had my light question from young. So when I got to my real adult years to fight off self-doubt fears, all my strength felt gone. This isn't the happy soundtrack of my life, but a recognition of perseverance when you hold on to your head with all your might and you realize, though your heart may be heavy, that's what gives you more weight when you stand on the stage of your championhood crowning. Your introspective eye to the universe of your mind is what needs adoring. And this is just the beginning. You've been fighting all this time, so good energy seems strange when it returns to you through the rain. And this is just the beginning, to feeling beauty radiate from your soul. And this is just the beginning of you conquering battles, creeping in the anxiety of feeling the unknown. And this is just the beginning of believing in the strength from your hard roots, all because you chose to stay focused on intentions, not those that have made you bruise. And this is just the beginning for speaking into existence positive affirmations, starting with I and not being so far removed. I am a series of decisions that lead to steps. I am home. Wherever I move, I am safe because I trust in my faith to keep me far from feeling alone. I am scared because I speak inner truths I have yet to grow up to. I am potential realized and nurtured, so I'm happiness also. I think I still have time, so I could do 2 more poems. I'm gonna go into healing. Healing. Embarking on finding a spiritual cleaning, a connection with your soul and understanding the attachments keeping you whole. It's an intimate process. Sometimes I don't like going through it alone, even though I'm meant to. Yes, this is me denying men access to my mental because not everyone deserves a key, particularly men who only value women on their ability to please. Do not disrespect my essence when I respect your senses to detect my high emotional intelligence. The world doesn't value female satisfaction. It has us reliant on male perception. Brothers ask for a queen but don't step up and contribute to her dreams. We are not your mothers, and we do not have to heal the damage of broken fathers. We are grieving daughters looking for appreciation in every son's sunken eyes. But the part left out of the story is, what do you do when you've been held hostage over your light? Man's sun is not solar. That vibration will leave you unbalanced. Regeneration in a generation that fears trust, regeneration in a generation that fears love, will only play seesaw with desires because that's the fastest way to feel high. It's hard to find an energy reciprocated when your worth is constantly deliberated. Like Mr. Brown said, this is a man's world. A man treats women as if he were raised feral. How come you don't trust? Whilst holding a lighter to my temple, ready to burn me with my own honesty. You ever sit in your bones while your soul flees? Opposite you, a bloodhound that preys on vulnerability, but disguises it by playing nice to me, saying I've brought light to help you see. But somewhere along these lines, my gut knows something isn't right. It turns when I follow your words out of being polite. You understand now why we tremble before we share our truth. Skeletons of past trauma ready to be dug out from the root. People who are broken always choose your story as a muse to make them feel like they're on a path to heal too. I call this the act of romanticizing self-love. You see, I was on the stage professing my dreams and pain, beams on my face I didn't see, the wave to come, drowning me in experiences as if it were God's hand dunking my head out of spite, saying, you think you're polished, you think you're done, you think by just speaking about your life it will change things without action. You want the clicks and claps got you ticking like a fiend for others' validations to give you permission to breathe. Your name is a fountain in heaven, but you don't use your blessings to fill your own cup. Let's see how you hold up. I was drained before I realized I was drowning. I propped my story up for people to feel was felt too much. How do you still love? This may be a man's world, but it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl. Enough has been given. The best of me is still grieving, but I let go a little every day. Don't come for my steam. This anger has been breathing through high altitudes as I've learnt to respire on the mountain of my troubles. I will no longer tolerate manipulative attitudes. That was healing. And the last poem is dedicated to my father. Means the world to me. It's called Vital Organs. I adore your kind eyes. Like mine, they squint through rain to see the colors of light souls colliding with hearts worth more than material. I am your rib, arms outstretched to curve around and protect vital organs. I know I give you trouble, shooting pains down your left arm and chest where your treasure lies, my head. Kind eyes are the closest you'll ever get to crying, because it was the last thing you shared with blood before you knew they were dying. Memories as warm as the sand of Baghdad, 1950s. Your sisters and Mama and Baba made home outside of a home there. The first generation of a Nakba begins. I know I give you trouble. You tell me I don't appreciate. I understand. As a man, how often is it you get to raise a family when you're a refugee? Status, chasing papers and validity. I came right on time. Home never seemed fragile because I never felt bombs rock me to sleep. As Mama sang a lullaby and a prayer, never seemed so urgent because you were always there. Sacrifices, I never knew real sacrifices because there's a difference between living life present and being ruled by the past's truth. So rather, it's not a sacrifice, but a reality I choose to take. I can't hold you forever and feel your buried pain in the same boat, for tears are one thing my eyes cannot contain. Dripping down, they'll fill our mobile home, causing us to drown in our deepest, bluest sorrows. There's still hope, for your wisdom has kept you afloat. I look up to your kind eyes to see eyelashes like arms outstretched, beating away to unhardened hearts. I see blue skies. I'll test these waters and search for shores. Baba, I can swim. You can let your daughter go. Thank you. That's my set. It is my pleasure to introduce the next poet, Maysan Nasser. She is a psychology and theatre graduate from the American University of Paris. She has a Master's of Research in Transnational Writing at Bath Spa University. In 2016, she won Beirut Poetry Slam, and in 2017, she was a semi-finalist at the Roundhouse Poetry Slam in London. She was the host and organizer of Beirut Poetry Slam in 2018 and has performed as a spoken word artist on tour with the Paris Lit Up through Italy in 2016, and through England in 2017 and 18. In September of 2016, her original play, Deadline, was staged in Paris. In October 2017, she founded Sidewalk Beirut, the first and only weekly open mic in the Middle East, which she continues to organize and host. Her poems have been published in numerous journals and anthologies. Last year, she published her debut poetry collection, Don't Tell Them. Please join me in welcoming Maysan Nasser.
Hello, thank you, Tasneem, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you all for being here with us tonight. I was really moved by your work, and I'm honored to follow you up. So, War and Peace, my poems are about internal conflicts, internal processes of war and peace. And I'm going to be sharing some very intimate material with you tonight. Okay, so this is the first poem. A mountain. Do you know what that means? A mountain. They will tell you that I am not, that I am weak, that I need to be savored, safe, saved, that I need to be protected from my own desires. They will tell you that over and over again, silently weaving braids of fear into my hair. They will tell you where I belong and where I do not. And they won't applaud it when I make it through hell, I mean the day. When I feel at home in a public space, when I don't hold my keys in my fists because of them. They won't see the mountain of work it takes to be a woman. Just to exist is a burden. Do you know what that means? A mountain. And still I do, day in, day out, holding continents together, even though I am continents. A part of me withstands, and comes out a winner just by being alive. A mountain, a mountain, a mountain. Do you hear the storms? Fear not. Can't you feel my weight? That was the first poem. The next two poems, I have to disclaimer them before I start because they are about my father, and they're really critical poems of our relationship. I've established peace with my father now, but it took a lot of war, internal war, to get there. So these are internal poems of war. I just want to disclaimer that we have a good relationship now, so that's in the past, but still, okay. This is the second poem. I have an eating disorder. I had an eating disorder. I have had an eating disorder. I am an eating disorder. I mean, I eat when I have to. I just eat to stay. I mean, food is really nothing. Nothing again for lunch or breakfast and maybe dinner. Now 1,000 calories in one sitting. My mom finding a plastic bag with tens of empty chocolate wrappers under my bed. My mom wondering where that chocolate gift went. My therapist smirking and saying, "You eat to fill an emotional void." As if he had arrived at a formula I wasn't aware of. As if that was supposed to fix things. As if my father doesn't address me in third person at dinner. As if he doesn't ask my mother to get her to stop eating. As if it's not a nuisance. As if it's just a nuisance. As if strangers don't ask my parents why they've let me get to this. As if my father didn't laugh along with his friend who called me a barrel. As if he defended me. As if they ignored it long enough until I needed surgery, as if I even puked water, as if men don't fetishize it even now when I've lost half of me, as if my mother doesn't say some men like meat, as if that's a compliment, as if some men don't feel virtuous for being with a fuller woman, as if they don't find in my body a reassurance that they're not superficial, As if I never asked my parents to pay to chop the skin off of my stomach, as if I don't now have a scar from one thigh to the other, as if he doesn't stare at my thighs and asks me why I don't wear dresses more often, as if he thinks the ladder can handle me, as if my own skin is not a ladder wobbling beneath these worries, as if I've learned to love excess, as if I'm not constantly changing sizes in the mirror, as if I don't go from repulsive to goddess in the split of a second, as if body dysmorphia is just a myth, as if I haven't heard quick fix solutions from men who don't understand it, as if they haven't just told me to eat when I feel like it, as if they haven't forced their ignorance on my body, as if I can unhear the snickers behind my back, as if I haven't been called a cow, as if it doesn't haunt me, as if I haven't been called a truck, a bulldozer, a barrel, as if my father had defended me, as if my father had defended me, as if my father hadn't laughed alongside his friend, as if my father had defended, as if years of therapy haven't been a way to make him pay for it. I'm fine, I just ate, thanks. Now the third poem. Residual pain. I alternate between my mother's lap and the arms of lovers who don't know how to hold me. Men who stare at me as I have panic attack and ask, what's happening? Men who fall asleep when I touch them. Men who fall asleep when they're done but promise they're not like the others. They would never do that, orgasm and pass out. No, they're asleep now. And your therapist says you take too little or ask for too much. There is no in-between. He mentions the Syrian in Nice, the Lebanese in Paris, the Lebanese in Shaitawi. He asks whether I can connect the dots. What do all these men have in common, Maysan? You see, I pay him money. He tells me I'm sick. It's a pretty gratifying back and forth on days when I can hold my ground and speak my mind and light a torch and walk him around the maze. Inside here, we have my father's office, where he spends most of his days bent over and writing. He's an incredible man, I tell him. He asks why my voice is shaking, why my fists are clenched. He's really an incredible man. He's done so much. He asks why I'm starting to tear up. He's an incredible man. He buys me things, pays my tuition. Hell, he even pays your bills. He asks why I'm biting my lower lip hard enough for it to bleed. I tell him, I guess maybe I just wish he would have been there more often. But I understand. He's a busy man because he's incredible. He helps others, goes places to help others. He helps others. You see, he's incredible. He asks why I'm finding it harder to breathe. I say, maybe I wish he wouldn't have addressed me as she at the dinner table. Maybe it would have been nice to hear from him when he traveled. Maybe, but he's old and phones are complicated and he barely has time because he's so busy helping others because he's incredible. You see, but why are you twisting your own wrists and ankles so hard, he says. Do you want to talk? I tell him maybe this is just gratitude and denial. Maybe it just festers in me so hard. Maybe it's just gratitude and denial. Maybe I'm just so grateful to the point that I mistake it for rage. Maybe I'm just so grateful to the point that it hurts. To the point that he shows up when I write poems about myself. That he shows up when I try to tell you about myself. That he shows up when I let him in even though he promised he'd be here 3 hours earlier. He shows up when I ask him to hold me and he says he didn't realize I was this insecure. He shows up when I beg him to call and he says he's tired. He shows up when I'm sitting by the seaside crying my eyes out, asking her how he could just leave without ever writing to me. It was nice to see you. Sorry, I broke your heart. He shows up when he tells me he never saw anything there other than a writer who knows how to pretend. That he only ever asked about me to be diplomatic, to be featured in my writing, that I'm too sentimental. He shows up when I share a cup of tea with women whose eyes are tender but their ache is present and they only ever mention their mothers when they speak about family. He shows up when they ask me where I'm from, and he shows up when they're surprised I didn't mention a whole bloodline in my introduction, that I just dismissed half of me. They don't ask why, but he shows up again and again. Like when I tell random men I'm suicidal, he shows up. When I try to turn Tinder matches into lovers, he shows up. When I let him make me feel worthless, when I believe it, when I chain smoke cigarettes and wait for this poem to save me, when I want to undo my words, he shows up, he shows up. He shows up. Residual pain. I alternate between my mother's lap and the arms of men who promise things. Why do you think that is? He asks. He shows up. Thank you. And finally, for my last poem, this is a very short poem, and it's a poem of peace. And it's what we make with what's left of the outrage and what's left with the anger and the frustration, what we make with what's left of that. Thank you for listening. Tender in the most abrupt sense, selfless in the aching desire, weak like a hurricane, weak, 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 holding the seashore one grain of sand at a time, one, wanting to swallow it whole. Where does the absence lead? Is it empty here? No one makes a sound. Nothing makes a difference. I almost want to say vacuum, but I won't succumb to the hyperbole. Empty does it. Empty always has. Empty says it best. Some call it clinical depression. She says you're immobilized. I think corpse-like. We both sigh. It is my wedding every day, and every day I say the same vows. I promise to try, and trying is enough, just as empty is enough, 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 enough. We could make something here, like a sandcastle. All right, so thank you so much. I'm going to pass you back to Yum. Thank you for listening. Thank you for this opportunity, and I can't wait to hear Farah.
Thank you so much, Tasneem and Maysan. That was so searingly beautiful. I felt that really deeply. I'm going to introduce our next poet, Farah Haridi. Farah is a Lebanese writer, researcher, and a fridge poet, self-defined fridge poet. You are free to make sense of what that means on your own. She just finished her PhD in comparative literature, and her favorite word is city. Over to Farah in Beirut.
Thank you so much, Yum. Thank you for everyone for being here, and thank you for Awan. Tasneem and Maysan, you've been wonderful, and it's a pleasure as always to read alongside you. My first poem is called Permission. This is for the extreme, the too much politically correct, the radicalist, the fundamentalist, the conservative, the neoliberal capitalist. This is for the saboteur, the amateur, the superficial, the stupid, the minuscule, the defeatist, the submissive flaneur. This is for the racist, the bigot, the sexist, the anti-feminist, the anti-other, the antibody. This is for the sentimentalist, for men who give us lessons in womanhood and women who still romanticize docility, subjugation, subservience. This is for the men who try too much and for the women who try not at all. This is for all of the above and more. For those who confiscated the colors of our rainbow, who turned them into religious or political symbols, but who still feel threatened by one piece of cloth which joins them all, which when we continue to raise, they reprimand us for coloring outside the margins, or for choosing the wrong abandoned, bullet-riddled building, the wrong wall, the wrong sidewalk, the wrong corner, the wrong street, the wrong city, the wrong country, the wrong soapbox, the wrong song, the wrong poem. This is for all of the above and more. For the Orientalists, the hypocrites, the never satiated, for the New Age Zionists, for those who monitor conversations, silence narratives, colonize roundtables, terrorize theaters, censor artists, displace refugees, raise homes, and ration breadcrumbs. This is for the genetically superior, for the right on the wrong side of history. This is for the banning and the bandits. This is for those who have been stealing time and it is still not enough. This is for those now adamant on stealing spaces, mutilating faces, and breaking places. But this is also for you and I, for the bare walls on our streets, for the now empty chairs in that cafe we first learned to say no in, for the remaining blank pages at the end of our notebooks, for the ink still dripping from our veins, for the clank of our glasses on tables 3 times each night. This is for when they demand we live in permission, but instead we insist on existing against it, in spite of it. This is for when they take our blanks away and we start writing on our skin. This is for when we become live bullets. So that was my first poem. My second one is called War. I did not train to be a poet. I did not train to become one either. I do not verse or rhyme. I am still learning how to raise my voice, how to violate my violent vowels, how to enunciate and change tongues and codes and registers, how to stress syllables so salt doesn't fall heavy on my palates, so that my taste buds are only made bitter by my own cigarettes, or sweet by lips I only choose to kiss. I'm still learning. Learning how to taste the colors of or electric tingles, for gray is just a misconception, a spelling mistake, a mispronunciation, an indecisive moment, a blindness, an oversight, a boring excuse we give ourselves so we do not see. I'm still teaching myself to decode and translate and speak in both tongues. I'm still learning how to break things, like rhymes that don't make sense, like aesthetics and excess of mirrors and placards and billboards and ads and bad poetry, like images and boundaries and walls, like my body. I do not train to be a poet. I give birth to my poems fiercely like my mother fought for her life while they took me out of her. Blue. I did not make a sound then. Lifeless, I hung from an umbilical cord I did not even ask for. You see, I was never a good swimmer, and no one had taken my permission before dumping me in water and handing me a rope I did not even know what to do with. Lifeless and blue, tongueless, my own words suffocating me. Shells fell around me, beckoning my early arrival. Bombs igniting skies that only seemed to have grown older, darker. 3 days in an incubator. 3 days getting rid of blue, yet it is still my favorite color. But when I got color, it was as if red was the only color I'm supposed to wear. Red, like blood and rage and love and passion and lust. So in red, I was born a poem in my own right. I even took the name of one. I did not train to be a poet. I do not train to be a poem. I birth them like war brings life and takes it away. My third poem is called A Map of Silence. I write verse at the back of my bedroom door that my mom washes out by mistake. I write verse at the back of my bedroom door that gets painted over by mistake, so I start writing verse on every clear surface, starting with my own skin. I map out my existence all over my body, etch it on and under my flesh, and I carry it with me into each space I possess, onto each street I brave the grounds of. My map stretches out to clear hesitations in my head as the sound of Adan dissipates my throbbing headache. On Hamra Street, I question what has once made this place home. A place the coordinates of which were once to emulate a friend's heartfelt tattoo. Right before I learned the meaning of the impermanence of place and space, the same coordinates would have spelled home on my forearm. But now home seems so far away, yet its form so close, almost platonic in its concept of the absolute. An idea so foreign to my reality, yet at times so familiar, almost familial. For how else do I explain my chills and shudders during prayer not birthed by my throat? At 14, I remember visiting an area I have lived at as a child for 3 consecutive years. I recall making my dad stop the car as it veered between 2 mountains, and the view expanded into a glorious vista, as if we were floating amidst mountains and swallowed by them at the same time. I remember looking at my father. I remember trying to explain my simultaneous feeling of being too large yet too small. I can still remember the taste of salt sticking to my teeth, smoothed over on my tongue, almost spelling out words on my behalf as they strolled down my cheeks. The salt of waters I could only imagine is surrounding the mountainous view. Then only smiled at my incomprehension. My comment only received silence. This is called shrapnel. In the cool breeze that's my grandmother's shade, the weeping willow, the misthiye, I lie unsure of whether that sharp pain on my right brow is a trace from last night's whiskey has trailed as it trickled up my head, or the remnants of a reflection of myself. A reflection of myself that I can no longer see in the side mirror of my car that I shattered just this morning. Shrapnel. In a body still struggling to reclaim itself, the jostle from this morning's furious collision of angry and upset against my mirror still reverberates throughout my body. I'm still angry, too large to fit into this flesh and too small not to, so I expand. I look myself in the mirror and I know this is not what I meant when I asked myself to breathe. So I try again, this time with little less judgment and a little more intention. I'll momentarily lie to myself, but I will not lie under the stars and bathe in the full moon's lights as hipsters cleanse crystals. Instead, I will lie in the cool breeze that is my grandmother's shade, the weeping willow, the misthiye, and she will tell me to keep on trying. So that was it for me. Thank you so much for being here, and I now pass it on to Yum because we have a Q&A session. Thank you so much. Yum?
Thank you so much, Farah. That was so beautiful. I think each of you addresses the theme in such different ways, and that's what makes it so interesting. I think if we can have the rest of the poets join us now, then we should be good. Make sure that you're commenting on our live stream with your questions. Make sure you're hashtagging, doing all of that good stuff. I'll be sure to keep an eye out for any questions that you guys might have. I mean, really take advantage of this. We have poets from all over the world here. We have an amazing poet from Damascus and Beirut and London. So, I mean, it's really a golden opportunity, guys. Okay. I think we are going to go to Q&A now. Hello, ladies.
Hey.
Hello,
That was
Tasneem, Farah. It was truly beautiful. It was really beautiful. You guys have all managed, like I was saying, to address. Oh, there we have Maysan. I think we've got Maysan now. Are you with us, Maysan? Yeah, I think Maysan is with us. Cool. So I think we'll get straight into it. This is okay. I think we'll just get straight into it. We'll have just a discussion. I think the first question is, I mean, there seems to be this theme around inner battles, right? Inner battles of war and peace. Could you guys, we'll start with this theme. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Why have you chosen that theme, the theme of war and peace, to address these issues? I mean, I've got one of you. What do you do when you've been held hostage of your own light?
I think it starts with I guess what people are the most attracted to. In that line, it's like your light, your energy, your story. But then you almost feel as if you have to, like, you define yourself by it. So you have to lead with that in whenever you introduce yourself to people. And it's almost as if your the trauma of your story, particularly, like, I'm Palestinian third generation refugee outside of Palestine. That, like, it's hard to kind of see yourself outside of that when people constantly see you as that first.
Yeah.
And back to your question, the inner battle, I guess it's just finding out who you are outside of struggle, but also understanding the struggle as part of your story.
It's really interesting. I mean, you're kind of addressing here as well this theme of stability, right, in an indirect way. And I think actually Farah really, her poems weave into that. Farah, you talk about the memory of war in a way, and I guess how that memory still affects the stability of today, right? The everyday life of war. As could you tell? Hello, Farah?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Did you hear me, Farah?
Okay. Yeah, yes, I can, but your voice was cutting a little bit. But if I heard your question correctly, you basically, I don't believe that whoever lived in Beirut or who was born in this country, I think, would agree with me that the war has didn't really end. So it is still in our, and we didn't get actually any kind of reconciliation. So it's still at the back of our head. It's still present in an everyday life. So even if we didn't live through it properly or remember it, we still remember it through our parents' stories. We still see it and face it in our everyday life. So the war for me specifically has been an extensive part of my own research. So so that's why it is a constant theme that comes on in most of my poems. We kind of, this generation, at least mine, lives through the war through secondhand memory, if you want, from their parents, from the generation before us. So that is why it is something that I always revisit in order to try to understand how I've experienced it, even though I don't remember it. I don't know if, for example, I just realized recently that my obsession with the city and my obsession with the space actually goes back to the first few years of my childhood during the war, and it explained why I'm actually claustrophobic, because most of my childhood has been spent hiding from the moms in the closet. So it is something very personal to me, and I'm still figuring out how it affects me personally. But it's inevitable that it shows in my work, I guess.
No, definitely. I mean, I've got a line here that you've written that really, I think it really captures exactly what you're talking about, and it's this is for those who have been stealing time and still it's not enough. So if it seems that until now it's not enough, that memory of war is still not enough, right?
Exactly. And also because I think we don't have a clear war narrative when it comes to the civil war in Lebanon. We don't have, for example, a history textbook that talks about that period, so we don't learn that at schools. We don't even talk about it, because if you talk about it, like, you have every faction blaming each other. So, and if you're familiar with a little bit with Middle East history, you realize that we're still actually dealing with the same people who made the war are still now kind of guardians of the new nation, if you want. So it's still far from over. So it's still haunting most of us.
No, that's really beautiful. I think we actually have a question from Noor Turkmani, if I'm right. So this is a question to, I think we've got Maysan who's joined us back. Maybe we put this question to Maysan then. How does the space you're in influence your writing? I think Maysan, you addressed all of that through those inner battles that you were talking about. Maysan? And I think Noor Turkmani, our questioner, also asks, she comments, your backgrounds are so diverse and rich, and I'd love to know more whether you're particularly inspired on one space over the other and why. Maysan, can you hear us? Okay, I think until Maysan's connectivity comes back, shall we go to Tasneem?
In terms of space, physical space, as a Palestinian, like our travel history goes through so many countries, and we have family like all across the world, from New Zealand to Iraq to Jordan. But I do find my work being inspired by childhood, and just, I guess, the innocence of, like, when you first see, I went to Iraq, Baghdad in 2002. So how I remember my auntie and my granddad, and a lot of my work is inspired by that, and through the memories of my parents of those countries, so including Kuwait and Syria and Lebanon. And it's just, it's weird to have different, I guess, different snapshots of those places in other people's memories that I haven't actually witnessed, but I am very inspired by other places, and I'm learning to piece that into my own story and, like, be present with myself as well. But my past work definitely is inspired heavily by that.
No, I think that makes so much sense. I mean, I'm half Palestinian myself, and I can absolutely relate to exactly everything you said. And I think just, one thing, you mentioned New Zealand. I mean, I didn't know us Palestinians had reached New Zealand, to be honest. So I think that's really incredible. Yes, I think, Maysan, if you're happy to, on the chat, we can totally, when it comes to questions, Maysan, you can answer them on the chat, and where, I'll be sure to read them out. Actually, I think, Farah, I want to bring up another point, that one of the things that you mentioned in your poems, this really struck me, and I don't know if it struck the rest of you guys too, and it was, I did not train to be a poet. And I thought that was interesting because in our minds, we don't really approach poetry as something that you train for, right? It's kind of the language that we use, sort of military language, isn't it? Militarized rather language. And, so I just thought, if you could just elaborate a little bit more on that, why did you choose to use that word train? You didn't train to be a poet. And just to our audience, Farah has a PhD in English literature, so she is trained in English literature. But why did you say training as a poet?
Actually, when I wrote that poem, I was in a poetry reading in London, and it was one of the weirdest readings I've ever been to because it was very exclusionary and kind of a bit elitist as well. And one woman in particular provoked me so much that I actually started writing the poem right there while she was performing. And she was talking about how she spent years training to become a poet, spent years learning the art and the whatever, and that infuriated me so much because, as you just said, we don't train to be poets. So that's why it started. It started with that line, I guess.
No, it's really. I mean, yeah, it makes. Now that you've given it some context, it makes absolute sense. But I just thought it was an interesting line. I think we have Maysan, who's just answered to the question, Noor Turkmani's question on space. Maysan says, I think the environment I'm in is reflected in my writings. The more suffocated it is, the less I can express myself, and vice versa. That's very interesting, Maysan, because a lot of your poems are about those inner battles, those inner struggles around body image, around familial relationships, the father-daughter relationship.
Yeah.
I actually have a really. Yes, we can hear you now, Maysan. And go straight to Maysan.
Can you hear
you have a line where
yes,
you say
great.
they won't see the mountain. Yes. You say they won't see the mountain of work it takes to be a woman. And that just, I felt it in my soul. So if you can just tell us more about that. How you've linked that sort of external visual of nature to the inner battle and struggle of just existing as a woman.
So the question about how does the environment you're in affect the spaces you're in influence your writing? For me, it's really dichotomous relationship between the space and the writing.
Hello? Oh, I think we've lost Maysan again. That's a shame. That's a shame. That's a real cliffhanger. But I guess, it's an open question to Farah and Tasneem as well. You both have those themes as well. Farah, in one of your poems, you talk about, you have a scene where you're in the car with your dad and you're driving through the mountains and you're reflecting on that memory, and Tasneem and vice versa, you address womanhood in your poems. Obviously you both think War and Peace is a really effective way to address those inner struggles. Tasneem?
Fast, Farah.
Fast, Farah. We'll go to Farah.
Okay. Well, for me, I've always written about space, and I've always written about about the city in general, and I've always also had this habit of I needed a certain kind of space around me in order to be able to write. So I can't write anywhere, which was something that I struggled with because you always hear or read about poets who just wherever they can write wherever they are on pieces of paper, on like napkins, and I can't do that. I'm trying to get over that a little bit, especially with lockdown. So that was also a challenge because now I needed to sit at my desk. I rarely do write at home. I write in cafes mostly because I'm claustrophobic and I can't stay at home. So space affects me a lot, and it affects my psyche, which also made me struggle with the relationship with the environment around me. For example, I lived all my life in a village where I didn't know anyone, which is my fault actually. But I never felt comfortable enough, for example, to just go on a walk on the streets. Not because it's unsafe or anything. I didn't feel comfortable walking as much as I would feel comfortable walking in Beirut or in the city, because maybe of the architecture or the way it is. The urban space. I don't know. I don't really know what it is, but I think I'm a city girl. So that has affects me a lot, and it also affects, because most of at least my reflections happen when I'm walking. I even sometimes write while I'm walking, but only in cities. So my specifically my space, my social space specifically, is very important to me, and that is why it figures in my poems and also affects the way I write and if I'm able to write or not. So it's sort of an inspiration. I think specifically in the space of the city, it is where stories are told, where you can see the everyday, where you can observe it, where you can connect stories about different kinds of people, where you also, it's a space of encounter. So to a lot of people, and you get to choose whether you actually will talk to them or not, or just observe them from a distance, not in a creepy way though. Just observe them for inspiration.
Yeah, of course. You've been in London before, so you know that we don't take well to talking to strangers in public. But which is really interesting, actually, because you've talked about that. That you've addressed physicality in a really interesting way, right? I mean, it's kind of, okay, you can't be trapped inside because it reminds you of those memories of when, of the Lebanese civil war. And so you don't want to revisit those memories, and you want to be outside. But of course, we're in lockdown right now. And so that's having a huge impact on how we write. And actually, I was just, Farah, yeah, exactly. So you've beautifully addressed that. Tasneem and Maysan, feel free to type your answer on the chat. I mean, Tasneem, how has lockdown affected how you write in that sense, when we're talking about that kind of struggle, the physical struggle of writing?
I guess for me, it's been more of the like freeing up mental capacity to write, because yes, we're in lockdown, but then everyone thought that they would get so much done, and it was just the chaos of what was going on, and just in the world, you just couldn't focus, you couldn't concentrate on just I guess getting a body of work done, or like everyone thought that this was going to be the best time to create a project and release it out into the world as a creative. But what I find in particular, the struggle of being a writer, is that writers need to write, but we've been fixated on being the entrepreneurial creative to monetize our talents so we can pay rent and bills. So we don't actually make time to write and intentionally just create our like, whether it's the week or the month, by like, their whole writer's process, because you're trying to balance being I don't know, a copywriter or a photographer, or your 9-to-5 job, if people who hadn't been furloughed. So there's I think for me, writing really depends on mental capacity. And where I found myself, where I've because writing for me is expression as well, and I've just experienced so much. So it's like at boiling point with mental capacity to deal with this one thing that I've experienced, that it comes out in writing. Like, okay, I need to just get it out. So there's extremes, I guess, for me when I write.
No, definitely. I mean, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, because there is this kind of expectation, hasn't there, been on creatives to write? I'm gonna, release my debut book of poetry during these 2 months or 3 months or whatever it is. Not taking into account that it's actually a global pandemic, guys, and it's not that it's not that simple. There are other moving factors, and I think it's this idea of creativity. It's not static. It's really very much vibrant, moving, alive, linked to our own personal histories, linked to what's happening around us, and sometimes linked to the physical spaces we're in, right? So I think, you've really, beautifully addressed that. I think, it's such a shame we don't have Maysan. I guess we can sort of share what we thought was so beautiful about her poems. We have another question from Noor, actually. There we go. Okay, from Noor Turkmani. How and where do you see the intersections between poetics, and political critique, and how can we think about poetry vis-a-vis the Arab tradition? I will say that we have to keep our answers short because we only have 5 minutes left. She also has an elaboration. So, for example, versus the modern tradition, English tradition, which separates expression and dismissed it as irrational, expressive or detached. So I think what Noor's talking about here is sort of the Arabic tradition of poetry, which is often more, not often more, but is perceived to be more flowery, more expressive, much rich, much more prone to use metaphor, and sort of the English tradition of poetry. So, I mean, how would you guys address that in, briefly, each? Farah?
That's actually a very big question. I will rant on, so stop me when I start rambling. But
Sure.
But basically, this is one of the reasons why I don't actually call myself a poet. But to answer very, very briefly, there is a very, very thin line between. Actually, there is no line. The personal is political at all times, and poetry is more personal than say writing. Of course, yeah, you have a personal essay and so on and so forth. But as a form of writing, because of its form and because of its being concise in poetry, as opposed to writing an essay or writing a novel or a short story, I think the political or part of writing is more in your face, if you want, and it has to be put to the floor. So it's stronger and it shows stronger in poetry. And now when it comes to I will talk about what I know specifically when it comes to Lebanon, which is why, for example, as a form of writing, it was the novel that was more prominent, specifically during the war. And after, because before the war, before that, it was poetry that was the most popular genre, and it was because of that, because it was very pastoral, flowery, very nationalistic. And then when the war happened, there was a disenchantment with all of this, specifically with ideology and so on and so forth. So it was replaced, not completely replaced, but as in popularity, the novel took precedence in Lebanon, specifically after the war, and it was because it was able to, and of course in a different form than the novel that we're used to. It became more fragmented. We had more representation of the everyday, the layman, the ordinary people, and I think when it comes to poetry, this is it's the same thing is happening, but of course it is. I consider the poems that are still like that are still a little bit underground, because we also talk. Yes, sorry, I rambled on. So
no,
I think
absolutely no, you didn't ramble on. I think it was really eloquent the way you sort of just summarized a really difficult question between the Arabic tradition of poetry and the English tradition. So it's really interesting. I think I'm just going to read out before we wrap up Maysan's answer to the question on lockdown. So Maysana said, lockdown has really put a strain on my writing, as it has reflected negatively on my spirits and my mood. I think that's, I mean, it's just such a beautiful way to sum up how, just because we might be feeling a little bit down or going through whatever it is that we're having in our personal lives, it doesn't mean that necessarily has to be reflected in poetry, and it doesn't necessarily have to come out through a creative outlet. And I think, Maysan, through her poems, there's a really beautiful, is just, incredible in doing that, addressing those sort of inner battles, those inner issues. I'm afraid, ladies, we're going to have to wrap up. We've reached our hour's limit. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to Tasneem from London. Thank you to Maysan from Damascus. Thank you to Farah from Beirut. And thank you to the incredible team at Arts Canteen and AWAN Festival for making this event possible. And thank you for tuning in with us today, wherever you may be. Until next time, Poets in Lockdown Part 3. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.